if you are in your 30s and 40s, retirement planning for you is completely different than retirement planning for someone in their 50s and 60s, which is the typical age of clientele that most other advisors focus on. Welcome to Wealth in Progress, the weekly podcast for professionals in their 30s and 40s trying to build wealth while juggling careers, family, rising expenses, and the occasional panic after scrolling social media for 5 minutes. I'm PJ, founder of Wealth and Plan, a virtual financial planning practice serving clients nationwide. If you want to learn more or start a conversation, head over to wealthandplan.com. We are currently accepting new clients and would love to get to know you. Here is this week's episode. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to week 4 of Wealth in Progress. I'm PJ. I'm a financial planner and founder of Wealth and Plan. I work specifically with young professionals in their 30s and 40s. And today, let's talk about retirement planning for young professionals. I had someone reach out to me over LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, and they asked if I do retirement planning. And the answer to that question is yes, but there's so much more that we as financial planners do, and retirement planning is just one part of the overall picture that we look at. So let's go ahead and jump in. So first of all, before we even get started, I'd like to sort of define what retirement planning is and what retirement planning looks like. So, when we talk about retirement planning, it really depends on your age, on your goals, on your other factors that you might have thought or maybe not thought of. One of the bigger things, especially whenever I work with a younger crowd, is we typically want to retire early. Whether you're in your 30s, whether you're in your 40s, early retirement is always something that is very desirable in our lives. Most of other planners out there, they focus on an older crowd that already has built up significant wealth, and they're entering those years where they're living off of their portfolio, their life savings, and kind of ride off into the sunset. So whenever we talk about early retirement, if that is one of your goals in life, there's a few factors that we have to keep in mind. First off, most retirement plans are built for you to achieve a certain age before you can access those funds without penalties, or sometimes without taxes, depending on the vehicle that you use. So let's talk about your traditional 401k, right? Let's say that you stay at the same employer forever and ever, and you want to retire at age 50. While the 401k language reads that you have to attain age 59 and a half before you can access those funds. Same if you were to roll those funds into a traditional IRA. So if your goal is early retirement at age 50, we have to take that into consideration. How can we build up another bucket for us to live off of until we can access that 401k without any penalties, without any taxes, if that's what we're trying to achieve. Again, when it comes to a traditional 401k, there's going to be taxes regardless, because they will tax you at ordinary income tax rates for every dollar that you take out. That is for a whole other topic. So that is the first piece, is looking from a retirement account standpoint. What are the rules and how do we best optimize the buckets that we pull from if we choose to retire early? Another part to early retirement is health insurance. This is kind of a big piece that a lot of people overlook, and private healthcare is very expensive. I was actually just looking at that not that long ago for somebody, and private healthcare in Texas is mostly HMO plans, meaning that you have to go to a primary care doctor to get a referral to see a specialist, and it's not the typical PPO coverage that you get from your employer. It's a lot more restricted from a PPO plan. And another thing about the private healthcare is it is expensive. Typically for a family of 2, and again, I'm not a health insurance expert by any means, but just from what I've seen, it's not surprising for the monthly premium for 2 on a private healthcare plan in your 50s or 60s to be in the $1,500 to $2,500 range a month. Again, don't quote me on this. This is just what I've seen. And If we're talking, let's say $2,000 a month for healthcare, that's $24,000 a year that we have to plan for, and that's just healthcare costs, right? That's just insurance. That doesn't count, any other medical expenses that we might run into. So if you're thinking early retirement, you got to think about healthcare as well. So how do we mitigate that, right? Of course, there are ways for us to mitigate that. We can use an HSA, for example, and save aggressively. There are private plans out there where you can get a PPO policy. It truly just depends. Sometimes they aren't okay with pre-existing conditions, if that is a factor for us, right? So if you're trying to retire before the typical retirement age of 65, then we have to plan for healthcare costs leading up to that retirement age. Of course, when you turn age 65, that's when you can start Medicare, and typically those premiums are a lot more affordable. Again, they do sort of go up. You might have heard of the IRMA tax. That is something that makes your healthcare costs, your Medicare costs go up if you earn a higher income. So there's lots of different variables when it comes to early retirement. And another part of that is just your lifestyle, right? If your goal is to retire early at age 50, 55, we need to ask the question of at what cost? And again, I'm not saying that early retirement is a bad goal. I'm not saying that at all. But what I'm saying is, I want my clients to also enjoy life today. There's no point of sacrificing life today for this imaginary future 20, 30 years down the road. How can we still plan for those events, but enjoy life today to where we're not sacrificing our lifestyle, our health, our savings too much today? So there's just that fine line of early retirement and what that means to you. For others, early retirement might not even be the dream. For others, it might be a situation where you're okay with retiring at sort of the traditional age of, your mid 60s, maybe early 60s, and that's totally fine. Again, planning changes a little bit. How is life going to look like whenever we get there? One thing that you might have heard of, if you've sort of dabbled a little bit into finance, is the 4% rule. In other words, what the 4% rule means is you can essentially live off your portfolio by taking out 4% every single year and minimize the risk of running out of dollars in retirement. Really, the logic behind that is, let's say you are a moderate investor. And again, this is all just hypothetical. Let's assume that your average return is 7% on an annual basis over the long term. And if you're living off 4% of your portfolio, then you give that a little bit of room for your portfolio to continue to grow and accumulate while you're living off the portfolio. There are a couple of risks. The biggest one is sequence of returns risk. What that means is, sure, maybe over 30 years of saving, you averaged a certain return, but now you've entered retirement and the market is in the red for 5 years into the first 5 years of your retirement. Well, that is not in your favor, and that withdrawal percentage is going to start to creep up because your portfolio is going to start to come down. So that is just something that becomes a little bit of a risk to you if you plan on living your portfolio, and something that we have to plan for. There are instances where if you are wanting to retire early, just going back to that really quick, the 4% rule really should be more of a 3 to 3.5% rule. So again, it really just depends on your situation and what you're going for. But going back to retiring at a normal age, obviously the big thing about that is, are you okay with that? Some people just absolutely cannot stand the thought of being at their current employer for another 30 years and think that the only way out is retiring early. There are other options out there. Maybe you're just not working your dream job. Maybe you're not in your dream company. Maybe you've not achieved that dream title that gives you the flexibility that you're looking for. Sometimes early retirement is not always the solution. Sometimes there's something else to it. And once you place yourself in that comfortable position, then you are okay with working for a little bit longer. Some people maybe stay working part-time or reduce their hours, and they're still able to keep all the benefits like healthcare and disability coverage, maybe if that's part of it, and maintain that job up until they are ready to, hang up the boots. So again, there's more to it in terms of defining the age of retirement. Whenever we're in our 30s and 40s, it's easy to say, okay, 55 is the age, 60 is the age, 65 is the age. It really comes down to checking on your plan every single year. It's really all about discussing your priorities, your goals, because that changes. You might want different things in life as you grow, as you get older. You might have kids that go off to college and you realize, you know what, I want to be closer to my kids. And if I do that, then I do have to retire early. There's so many scenarios out there. And part of what we do at Wealth and Plan is goal realization. Is if we're wanting to retire early, why? What does that look like? How are we going to get there? And so we look at all those different variables, which allows us to make an informed decision. And then if we do decide that early retirement is in our future, how do we implement the plan and how do we monitor it year by year to ensure that we're on the right track of success? Right. That's really the biggest part of that there. So going back to the beginning of this podcast where someone asked me if I do retirement planning, I do retirement planning. That is a big focus of ours. Again, that is just one part of what we do. There's a lot that goes into retirement planning. Retirement planning looks a lot different for a young investor. If you are in your 30s and 40s, retirement planning for you is completely different than retirement planning for someone in their 50s and 60s, which is the typical age of clientele that most other advisors focus on. Those people at a little bit of an older age, they're one step closer to retirement, and everything changes whenever we get to that point. The biggest thing that you have to your advantage as a young investor is time. If you come to a financial advisor and you have not pursued retirement or early retirement as one of your goals and you're 5 years away, it is going to be a whole lot more challenging for you as an individual to achieve that goal and that dream than someone in their 30s and 40s planning for retirement at 55. You've got years ahead of you to where you can make informed decisions leading up to that goal and really set you up for success. You ultimately want retirement and early retirement to be an option that you have, not this hope and dream that hopefully someday I get to retire. The goal is to set you up in a position where if you want to retire, you can. If you don't want to retire, you don't have to. And how do you truly make the best decision that you will be happy, not just for yourself, but for your family and those around you? So, with that being said, thank you guys for listening. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It's not investment advice. Everyone's situation is a little different, so talk to a financial professional before you make any decisions. Please hit the subscribe button if you're listening to us on YouTube. I will also cross post this to Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you are on the go. If you just want the highlights, I will post them on Instagram and LinkedIn, so feel free to follow us on those social media platforms. And again, if you have any questions or if you'd like to work with us, feel free to reach out. You can find my contact information on our website, wealthandplan.com. I've got my email on there, my phone number. You can even text me on there if that's easier. And other than that, thank you very much, guys, and hope you have a great week. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.